Item 8, public hearings. We're going to hold a public hearing this evening and extend the interim urgency ordinance regulating cultivation and prohibiting the manufacture, processing, laboratory testing, labeling, storing, wholesale, and retail distribution of non-medical marijuana pursuant to Government Code Section 65858A. Mark?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This is a request for an extension of an urgency interim ordinance that the City Council adopted on October 25th. That was before the statewide election, which we now know the results of, and the results of the statewide election is that Proposition 64 was adopted by more than a majority of the public in the state. What that means is that as of the election date, a number of activities regarding commercial marijuana would become legal in California, including distribution, testing, cultivation, and other activities. So some cities, prior to the election, adopted, as you did, an urgency ordinance that would allow the city some additional time to study the potential effects of the situation if Proposition 64 passed. Well, now we know that it passed, and so now we really need to start studying what could the effects be. Does the city wish to allow these sorts of activities in the city, and if so, under what circumstances and regulations? Or does the city wish to disallow these activities? And to be clear, also for members of the public, thank you. Now I have two microphones. The Prop 64 does still retain local control for cities. So cities do have the ability to prohibit, if they would like, or to allow and regulate the sorts of activities that Prop 64 authorized. One of the things that the cities cannot do under Prop 64 is totally ban indoor cultivation of up to 6 plants. So that's something that the city has to allow, but can also study whether to regulate or not. Outdoor cultivation can be banned if a city would like to. Commercial sales, distribution within the city, all of those things could either be allowed and regulated or could be prohibited. So since the election, we've done a little bit of research, but obviously it's only been a few weeks. And what we found out is that the County of San Mateo is actively studying the question of whether and what type of regulation the county might wish to have. And they might propose some sort of regulation that then other cities could opt into, for example, on a voluntary basis. We also want to take a look at the experiences of other cities and states, frankly, that have had these voter initiatives implemented and determine what are the best practices, what are the sorts of regulations that cities might want to adopt if they wish to allow these activities. So the purpose of the report tonight under state law is that you have an option, an opportunity to extend the moratorium for an additional 10 months and 15 days, so for a total of a year since when you adopted it, so the city can study these things. We don't think it's going to take that long for the city to study the issue. We anticipate bringing something back to you probably first or second quarter of next year. So you can obviously terminate the moratorium as soon as you want or as soon as you're satisfied that you have enough information about making a decision. So tonight's action, which would also need to be taken on a 4/5 vote, would be to extend the moratorium for the specified period and then allow staff to come back to you next year with really a comprehensive report on what's going on in this area and how the city can respond. That concludes my staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Anything for Mark at this time before I open the public hearing?
To the chair.
Marty?
Mark, so if somebody did grow plants outside and we allowed it, or let's say first we went along with the ban, what would happen to that person legally if they were to grow some plants, 5 plants outside? What would happen?
So state law under Proposition 64 does allow the outdoor cultivation of up to 6 plants. The moratorium that the City Council enacted said that there is no outdoor cultivation allowed, and if you extend the moratorium tonight, there will not be any outdoor cultivation allowed. If at some point next year the City Council decides to allow some of these activities, including, say, outdoor cultivation, then that person who was interested in cultivating marijuana outdoors could resume their activities. But as of right now, they cannot cultivate marijuana outdoor, and if this is adopted tonight, they could continue to not, they can't cultivate until you say they can.
Right, and the consequence of where they get fined for growing? I mean, what's the consequence of somebody growing the plants and actually getting caught doing so?
So happy to have the police chief respond to that. There's no consequence in the ordinance except that doing so is a violation of the ordinance. So there could be fines and penalties issued under the ordinance.
Okay.
Chief?
Good evening. Yes, I'd be happy to answer that. Right now, the code allows us to establish this moratorium, which basically prohibits the outdoor cultivation of marijuana, which would revert back to the Health and Safety Code, which had originally governed that. So it would be a violation of the Health and Safety Code, which is a misdemeanor. So it can be a fine of up to $1,000 or a year in county jail, but that is highly unlikely for 6 plants.
Okay, just curious.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? All right, at this time, we'll open the public hearing, and anyone from the public like to address the council on this item? Just tell us your name and your street.
Kevin Martinez, 177 Martin Place. Since 2009, I've had some kind of an autoimmune problem that's decreasing my cartilage. I've had an full ankle replacement on the right and a full knee replacement on the left. I've got also some spine issues. I've got bone on my shoulders. I can go on and on with my medical conditions. But since it was legal, I'm not about to do anything legal, but since it became legal medically, I tried some marijuana and it helps in a lot of ways. So I didn't want to do anything illegal. I got everything all together, and the fact is that since it helps, I use it now. Since then, I've developed a fatty liver, and the doctor recommended I don't drink anymore. I used to have a glass of wine before bed to help me relax. Now I do this instead, and it really works fine in place of a glass of wine. And I don't do it irresponsibly, obviously, but last year I grew 3 plants, and that was enough to fill my prescription for a year. That cost me all of $30, $10 for the small little starter. And $30 to fill my prescription for a year fits my budget. The doctor put me on disability, forced me to put me on disability, which completely limits my budget. So what I'm trying to say is, and not to fill up my whole 3 minutes, is if I was to go to like the city and go fill my prescription, that would cost several $1,000s, which I couldn't afford. So this would be just taking away what the doctor has prescribed for me that's working for my illness.
Well, Kevin, let's let the city attorney address that, because I believe this has to do with non-medical marijuana. Is that correct, Mark?
Right.
Yes, that is correct. So this ordinance actually does not affect and doesn't have anything to do with the use of medical marijuana for medicinal purposes. So the ordinance only relates to commercial or industrial marijuana facilities located in the city, manufacture, processing, testing, wholesale distribution, and retail distribution. So if individuals have a medical marijuana card and are utilizing medical marijuana at this time for their own personal use, this ordinance doesn't affect them.
I got a question though. So now that the state law passed and you no longer need a medical marijuana card, how are we supposed to differentiate the guys who are doing it for the purpose, if I said, or just for fun?
So that if I may, through the
Please.
chair, that's a really good question, and that's one of the things we're all trying to figure out. It turns out that the state law under Prop 64, if anybody read the fine print, says that the state, for example, is not going to be taxing medical marijuana, but is going to be taxing commercial marijuana. So state law still draws this distinction between individuals such as yourself and others who might have a need for medical marijuana, and those others who might wish to engage in marijuana use for recreational purposes. So one of the things that we're going to be trying to sort out is how do those two things coexist in the same place. But this ordinance nor state law shouldn't affect your ability to obtain medical marijuana if you wish to do so. Proposition 64 didn't eliminate medical marijuana. You could still use that if you'd like.
So I'm good where I'm at now. Because I can't bring anything inside because I have grandchildren. I keep it all contained in a solid wall greenhouse locked up.
Well, I don't know
I don't want
anything
my
about that, but
grandchildren
all I
near
can say is that your use of medical marijuana is not prohibited by this ordinance.
Okay.
Okay, good, thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, my name is John Dillon. I'm a neighbor of Kevin's over on Martin Street. Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. I hope going forward that you will continue to differentiate between medical marijuana. I'm on permanent disability myself for issues I'd rather not go into. It would just take up a lot of time. But going forward, I hope that you will continue to differentiate between, use of this for legitimate medical purposes. And there's a long list, both anecdotal and actual medical fact, of, glaucoma, cancer patients that are having problems with their appetite, HIV/AIDS patients, problems with sleeping, for instance. The munchies are a well-known effect on marijuana, and then sometimes you want people to be able to eat when they're sick. So anyway, I hope that the council, in considering any kind of regulations, will continue to differentiate between recreational and medical marijuana use, and also realize that as far as outdoor cultivation goes, you would be imposing considerable costs on people on meager disability income. Just the lights alone cost hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars, and they're quite high power. So your power bills would be couple $100 a month. For somebody on a disability, you basically would be shutting them off of any chance of obtaining medicine at a reasonable rate where they could produce it themselves. So please consider that going forward. And just lastly, I would like to say that I realize that there may or may not be permits or discussion about commercial operations going forward in the future, and I'll let that debate for another day. But if there is any commercial profits to be made going forward for any kind of outlets that are approved, if they are, I hope that you can devote a large portion of those funds to the San Bruno Park School District that's in need right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the council on this? If we close the public hearing, you're going to be precluded from speaking on this item again. Any action by the council?
Move to close public hearing.
Second.
Motion is second. On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any discussion or action by the
Through
council?
the chair.
Rico?
Just one of the comments from the last speaker. City Attorney, correct me, but the way Prop 64 was written, any proceeds would only be gained by the state. The municipality of the city of San Bruno receives zero, the way the measure was written. And so we would have to then go to a Proposition 218, which would require us to go to the vote of the people to then try to recoup costs and or get profit, whether they could be earmarked or not. But at this time, the way the law is written, the city receives nothing. Am I accurate or not?
Yeah, just with one small caveat is the city would continue to get a share of sales tax, just like it gets on sales tax of any item, because the commercial marijuana sales will be subject to sales tax. But aside from that, there are no proceeds coming to any city under Prop 64, and you're correct, council member, that in order for cities to impose a tax on a commercial activity, that would require a vote of the people. So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, is determining what would be the effect of these facilities, if any, in town. What would the cost be, and is it possible for the city to recoup those costs through a ballot measure or vote of the people?
Okay. Any further discussion or action by the council on this item?
To the chair.
Ken?
I think we got a lot to learn. And so I'm going to make a motion that we can extend the interim urgency ordinance
Okay. Is there a second?
as stated.
Second.
Motion is second to extend the interim urgency ordinance. On the question?
I'm sorry, it's a resolution,
It is a
so
resolution.
I will introduce the resolution.
Councilmember O'Connell. Aye. Vice Mayor Marty Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Rico Medina.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye. Okay, great.
Aye.
And Councilmember Ibarra, thank you.